Thank you so much for those introductions. Viewers and listeners, those of you who would want to purchase and to get a copy of this book, please do not forget to click the link that is right in the description panel on the upload for this video. So I'm going to invite now Dr. Albert Sharra. I would just want you to give us a brief overview and breakdown of what you consider to be the core ideas of the book and its central argument.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. So we would say, I think this book comes at a time in which we really want to reflect on the past, and it also comes, I think, after just a few years after the BBC celebrated its first 100 years of existence. So it was a moment for us to reflect, to say, okay, here's the BBC, what was its role in Africa? So the core argument that we are trying to advance in this book, I think, focuses on the issue of colonization. We firstly pay attention to the abolition of colonization, but now building an argument to say the end of colonization, what did it actually mean to broadcasting? So that raised the question of saying, where did the media, like the history of African broadcasting starts? Where is it starting from? So when we asked that question, we realized that it starts from the BBC. So, and then we asked ourselves, how did the BBC found themselves within the colonization project? And so we, through the digging, we realized like the BBC was really engaged to participate in the colonization project through the British Colonial Office. So now the question is, the main argument that we are advancing to say, should we say that the end of colonization also meant also the end of the legacy of the BBC, or not the BBC, but colonization? So whatever the infrastructure that the colonization put in African broadcasting, or just in Africa, should we say it all ended with the end of colonization? That's the key question that we are advancing in this book. And the argument that we are making now is the end of colonization itself did not also go together with some of the infrastructures that came with colonization. And one of these infrastructures now is broadcasting, in which now the BBC comes like the main player. So by being involved by the British Colonial Office, the BBC's main role was to help this colonial office in establishing broadcasting in the British colonies. So their role was to help the colonial office to do this job. So even if the colonial office said colonization has ended, the work of the BBC also needed a specific declaration of ending it. So we can't see that to say it ended here. So we are trying to argue to say, you see what, even after at the end of the colonization or the abolition of colonialism, this did not also end the BBC influence in Africa. Rather, what we see is that the broadcasting models in Africa, the institutional practices, and also journalistic cultures, they still continue to shape the African media landscapes through the process like of hybridization, adaptation, as we see across the region. So that's the main argument that we are advancing in this book, to say the end of colonization did not also end the influence of the BBC in African broadcasting.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for that. I would now want to invite Jimmy Kainja to just briefly describe the contribution that this book is making. I understand that this book was published under the Routledge series on African media, culture, and communication studies. So this is your time.
Thank you. I think it's quite important to mention that, as perhaps Albert has said, there are a lot of discussions and scholarship around issues to do with colonial legacies in Africa and whatnot. But when you look at this book, I think what you're trying to do is to not necessarily depart from those discussions, but to take BBC as an institution and to look at what this institution has done, the contribution of this institution to this question about colonial legacy in Africa. So what's emerging from this book, actually there are three sort of thematic issues that I can pick out from. So the first thing, basically the first issue, is that the book is demonstrating how the BBC as an institution So the BBC's institutional norms, how they were adopted, reworked, and how this is happening across Africa. So by Africa, basically, we specifically covered the three sort of regions of Africa. So the Anglophone, the Francophone, and the Lusophone Africa. It's easy perhaps maybe to overlook the fact that we're talking about BBC. It's a British institution. We're not just talking about the former British colonies, but also other colonies, countries that were colonized by other forces, so the Lusophone and the Francophone Africa as well. So what this book basically is doing, the second issue, is that it's bridging this sort of colonial, post-colonial, and decolonial perspectives, trying to offer some sort of theoretical insights and into issues to do with cultural hybridization, institutional evolution, and the field of journalism in general in Africa, because its contribution is not just a question of institutional setup, but also the practice itself, how journalism is being practiced, how it has been practiced, and some of the changes that are also actually happening. So the other issue that people can find from this book, basically, that it highlights the underexplored influence that the BBC has had. So in media and communication studies, in most cases, basically, we look at theories that underpins one thing and the other, but not necessarily how to look at a specific institution, the sort of impact that it has had. If you look at most African countries, entirely for the countries that are explored in these books, you can actually see that even from the naming, the Malawi Broadcasting Corporation, the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, South Africa Broadcasting Corporation. But what we're trying to do basically is to look at just beyond the semantics of the names and, perhaps the frameworks as well, practice. So if I'm in South Africa, I'm listening to a radio, there's news at 12 o'clock. In most cases, you can only change the channel because you just want to see if maybe there's different news elsewhere. But everybody does the same thing at the same time. It's because of that influence of the BBC. So what we're trying to do basically is not necessarily to look at this from sort of negative, positive point of view, but trying to gauge, how that influence, has stayed on, how that influence is being changed, and how that has shaped the way African broadcasters and journalism in general has actually been shaped, and also moving into where we are now in a digital sphere where broadcasters are not just only the influential providers of information, but other spheres as well, digital platforms and so on. So the contribution is there in setting up the media institutions, in setting up practices, but also the structure of what journalism is in Africa. Thank you.
That's great. Viewers and listeners, it is important for you to note that this book was published as part of the series, or the Routledge series, on African media, culture and communication studies. Several other authors that published books under this series can be accessed on the link that I'm going to paste right in the description panel on the upload for this video.
Oh, this is the one you like. Yeah. Yeah.